So welcome everybody. I am Kelly Hagan. I'm the MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher for the middle school zone. And my partner in crime today is Bo Burkett, and he is the MTSS Resource Teacher for the high school zone. So today, we're going to get started with just discussing the components of the multi-tiered systems of support as a whole. And you'll see on this graphic that how each of our pieces of work connect to each of our 6 systems within JCPS. So everything from data-driven decision-making to addressing those academic, social, emotional, and behavioral development of all of our students as well. So the MTSS department is broken down into several different components, first of which is going to be the MTSS academic. And that department is supporting schools by ensuring teachers are providing all students with academic supports that include differentiation, personalization, and enrichment activities that are guided by the Universal Design for Learning Principles, or the UDL. Their main focus is on Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and supports, so kind of the old RTI mindset. And the leader of that department is Donna Lawson. So if you need to contact that department, that would be who you would reach out to. Then going over underneath the culture and climate, we have Mtss Behavior. And the MTSS Behavior Department supports schools in implementing school-wide behavior systems and frameworks. The 2 frameworks used by JCPS are going to be the Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, which is PBIS, and the Behavior Support System model that aligns with that, and the restorative practice. So additionally, that team supports schools in understanding and utilizing classroom management strategies, and that department is led by Sandra Hensel. So if you need assistance with that. And then the MTSS Re-Engagement Department is led by Naomi Brahim, which their support supports students who are transitioning back into their home schools from our special schools, such as Minor Daniels Academy and Breckenridge Metro. That leads us to the MTSS Engagement Department, which our goal is to increase student achievement by equipping teachers with the high-yield pedagogical practices to maximize student engagement. So essentially, we're looking at Tier 1 instruction as opposed to those Tier 2 and Tier 3. So really focusing on that instructional core to increase engagement and reduce those unwanted behaviors for students. And today, all of our work is folded under these 6 toolkits, which focus also on the work of John Hattie. If you have access through the Digital Learning Channel's agenda today, you'll have linked to this actual page, and this graphic is a link to our MTSS engagement website, where you can have access to all of the different toolkits and all the information that's provided within them as well. And our department is broken down by zone, as you can see here, under the leadership of Dr. Naomi Brahim. So the work of today, which is opportunities to respond, falls under the feedback toolkit, which is toolkit number 6. And the definition of feedback, as you can see here, is information provided by an agent. So a peer, a teacher, a parent, somebody's experience about one aspect of one's performance or understanding. John Hattie really focuses on the most powerful form of feedback is when the students, coming from the students to the teacher, and we don't mean that as kind of that reflective piece of how did our lesson go today, but taking the opportunities to actually hear how students are responding to those questions that we're asking as educators, as to what they understand, where they're making errors, and when they have those misconceptions, and how we are adjusting our teaching practices to move forward. So the success criteria of this high yield practice is to provide frequent opportunities to respond that result in feedback through a variety of student responses. Some common ones are going to be those individual responses, peer-to-peer, or that student-to-student discourse, or one that we see a whole lot of is that whole group choral response. And these can be done either verbally, non-verbally, or written. So the definition of an opportunity to respond is the interaction between the teacher's academic prompt and a student response. So the teacher is either going to ask a question or give a prompt, and the student's going to respond to that. So this also gives an opportunity for not only the teacher to get that feedback, but to also formally assess the student learning throughout that process. So our purpose for today is going to develop a little bit of a deeper understanding of the different types of opportunities to respond, and we'll have a resource for you here a little bit later. And we'll be determining various types of opportunities to respond to integrate into lessons, whether it be brick and mortar or distance learning. So this is always a fan favorite cartoon of mine, because I can think of many times where as an educator, I'm super excited about the lesson that I have planned. I really feel like my students are going to be engaged, and I turn around after getting it all set up and half the class is disengaged. So just thinking about what we can do to change the culture of these classes so that the students are just as excited about what's going to happen the next day, as opposed to the teacher being the only one that is excited. So I'd like to do a little bit of interaction if we can. I know that there's a little bit of a delay. But in the chat, if you can answer the following questions about a scenario that I'm going to put on the board. So how many times in the scenario did the teacher give students an opportunity to respond? And then what were the various strategies used to get students to respond? So those are our two questions. And our scenario is, shortly after science class started, the teacher announced, "We will have a small block of ice and the same size block of butter. Tell your neighbor which one would melt first." A few seconds later, the teacher said, "Please write down in one sentence an explanation for your answer." A few minutes later, the teacher told students to share with their neighbor what they had written. Shortly thereafter, the teacher called on one student to tell their class her answer. The teacher then asked the class to raise their hand if they agreed with the answer. Then the teacher asked students to give a thumb down if anyone disagreed, and so on. So looking at this scenario, just think about how many opportunities to respond the teacher gave. And this scenario can be done virtually or within the classroom. And what are those different types of opportunities as well?
Is this my cue, Kelly?
Yep, it is.
Okay. All right, so how many times in the scenario did the teacher give students an opportunity to respond? If you counted correctly, then you should have counted six times, and there were various strategies used throughout. So the teacher used talk to the neighbor twice. They used a written response, individual verbal response, nonverbal responses such as raising their hands and thumbs down and so on. And here are all of the six highlighted. But okay, so when do we use opportunities to respond? I'm going to say OTRs for short, but you can reuse them in a variety of ways: when promoting classroom participation and academic engagement, during direct instruction, when teaching specific behaviors to individual students or groups of students, when checking effectiveness of instruction, when checking how well students understand the academic content. And there's 5 steps on how to do it. Number 1, identify what's being taught. Step number 2, choose how the students will respond. Ideally during lesson planning, not spur of the moment, although both of those are valuable. But ideally you want to be planning these OTRs up front. 3, determine whether students will have the opportunity to respond individually or in groups. 4, pose a question or command related to instruction. And 5, reinforce correct responses and prompt students to make changes and corrections. How to increase effectiveness. Include OTRs or opportunities, for students to make corrections if they answered incorrectly. Continue to provide feedback for both correct and incorrect answers. Ask all students to respond to each question if they were working individually. This increases OTRs for all of the students. Increase the rate of questioning, asking to both individual students and groups of students. Allow students time to process information before responding. Allow students time to discuss answers with partners or groups before responding. And provide verbal praise and reinforcement for correct group and individual responses. So if you look at this chart, here's 5 different types of frequent responses, all the way from oral responding on the left end to action responses on the right end. And if you look within each one of these groups, there are verbal responses such as choral response. There are written responses such as a think, write, share. And there are nonverbal responses such as students giving hand signals. But just take a minute and look at which one do you use the most frequently. And right now we have to think of NTI world, and we also have to think of once students come back and we're actually in person, which one of these is your go-to? So as our team went and observed classrooms throughout the entire district, regardless of whether it was elementary school, middle school, or high school, we basically saw the same thing in each classroom for the most part. And that was that teachers were using individual responses and verbal responses. So that's the classic teacher teaching at the front of the room. The teacher asks a question, a student raises their hand, answers the question, the teacher gives feedback, and so on. And then the lesson continues. But there were very few opportunities for kids to talk or discuss ideas together. There were even fewer opportunities for kids to write about what they saw. Mainly what we're seeing is just individual verbal throughout all classrooms, throughout all levels, throughout JCPS. And so our goal as a department then is we want to increase not only the number of OTRs used throughout a lesson, but also the types and varieties that are used throughout the lesson. So we created this little spreadsheet. Actually, it's not a little spreadsheet, it's a humongous spreadsheet. And we can't go through it all today, obviously. But it's a list of about 70 different OTRs. And they're sorted between OTRs that would be appropriate for the beginning of class, the middle of class, the end of class, and there's some hyperlinks in here. And you can have access to this resource if you access our presentation online, or if you just email me or Kelly, we can send it to you. But I highlighted a few in green that I thought would be appropriate for NTI. So obviously one of them that's really easy is nonverbal is fist to 5, which you can just ask students to rate their understanding of a given topic. 0 meaning that they don't understand anything at all, and 5 meaning that they're ready for a summative test. That's really easy. Another one would be a card sort. And this is one that we tried to use during a professional development session. Obviously, we can't provide cards for you. We don't mail cards for you in the mail and have you sort them and then mail it back. But there are online tools. And one that I wanted to show you is a tool called MindMeister. And so this is what the assignment looked like at the beginning. And what we did, Kelly and I, we listed all of the OTR strategies on the left and right side. And then we were going to have teachers sort these OTRs by whether they were individual, peer-to-peer, or whole class. And then within those categories, whether they were verbal, nonverbal, or written. So basically, response cards, that would be an individual, nonverbal response. And so what they could do is they could just pick this little guy up and move him to the nonverbal, and now it's sorted. And so the answer key then looks something like this. But it's a different way to assess students, it's a different way to engage students, and it's possible to do it online. Another good tool is Nearpod, which I don't know yet. I'm trying to learn it now. Thank you, April Bemker, for introducing me to that. But we're trying to create a presentation now with Google Slides. But Nearpod is really good because it will give students an opportunity to respond and an opportunity for you to assess them during your Google Slide presentation. So instead of giving your entire presentation and waiting to the end to assess, you can give them a couple slides, ask them a question, and then the students can answer that question, and you can get real-time data so that you can, discuss any types of answers or misconceptions that they have. But it's a really nice tool. I wish I could show you now, but I just figured with the delay that it wouldn't work very well, so we chose not to.
I just want to piggyback off that. Nearpod is a great tool, and it is approved for us to use with our students. Another great tool, if anyone has not looked at, is the Smart Suite Learning Online, and you can get that all within your Google Drive, and it has like the card sorting and very familiar or similar to Nearpod as well. So those are, again, two great tools that are easy that you can use, and it is approved for our students to use as well. So, when you mentioned tech, I kind of perked up because that's my field and that's what I love to do and to use and to help teachers with tech in their classroom. But yes, both of those tools are great to use.
So if you want to take over now, you can.
No, you can handle it. You're great.
Okay, all right. Okay, so just a couple more slides then. One, culturally responsive considerations is provide positive responsive feedback regarding student responses and participation, incorporate students' responses, ideas, languages, and experience, prompt students with effective and cognitive feedback, validate student contributions while also clarifying and expanding their statements, and creating multiple opportunities for students to respond using dialogue. Excuse me. Okay, so exceptional child education considerations. Increase your opportunities to respond. Ideally, we're striving for 3 per minute, which sounds like a lot. However, if you think of all of the different ways you can have kids respond, one of the ways that, an example I gave when I did a PD for the district was, most people know what 4 corners is. So if you have students answer a question by going to a corner, that's a nonverbal response. And then in that corner, if you have them write maybe on a whiteboard why they chose that corner, that would be a non-written or a written response, excuse me. Then you could give them time to discuss with people in that corner about their ideas, which would be peer-to-peer verbal. And then you could take it a step further and have students switch corners and maybe justify their position or their answer or decision with another student, which would be another peer-to-peer verbal. And then they could go back to their seat and write about what they learned from students in their own corner and also students from a different corner. So within that one scenario, you're looking at potentially 5-6 responses just in that one activity. So I think that a lot of planning goes into play here, especially, up front at the beginning on how you can incorporate these. But if you get creative and you plan up front, then it's definitely possible to hit that 3 per minute. Next one, consistent progress monitoring and corrective feedback in a timely manner. Relevant, specific, modeled, positive, and encouraging feedback. Plan for and provide multiple means of engagement through choice and relevant, authentic activities. In PBL considerations, deeper learning, teachers should create many opportunities to receive feedback from students throughout the project. Specific feedback should be given to students to guide next steps. One-on-one and small group conferences should occur throughout the learning process. Rubrics should be used during conferences as a guide to ensure feedback is specific and aimed at desired goals. Formal feedback checks should be scheduled in advance, and many lessons should be used throughout the project to help clear up common misconceptions and difficulties held by the majority of students. So with this, a lot of people think PBL, you create a project and you give the students a rubric and you just let them go off and do their own thing. But the ideal way to do project-based learning is check-ins throughout the process, regular scheduled check-ins, but also informal check-ins. And then anytime you see all of the students struggling with a particular area, that's the time for you as the teacher to step in and give a mini lesson to clear up any misconceptions and keep kids moving in the right direction. So here are our toolkits, and just like Amy and Dominique mentioned, these are linked. So you can click on these and it will bring up our website, which looks different.
So this is actually our new website for the MTSS department. It's the one-stop shop for multi-tiered systems of support. So you will find on the website now all of the MTSS academic, MTSS behavior, and MTSS engagement resources. And so it's a little bit different than the initial website that was referenced at the beginning, which is just the toolkits, which is this one here. So just by clicking at the top and clicking engagement, it'll take you directly to that engagement toolkit website, where you can navigate through and get all of those resources for the different high yield practices that fall within each of the toolkits and the supporting systems as well.
So I believe that is it. There's our references, which you can read at during your free time. And that's all we've got.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.